I'm Sarah Parker, and I've worked at the Woodrow Farm for the past 5 years. It's a peaceful, quiet place with a large barn and acres of land. The farm's owners, the Woodrows, are kind people, but there's one thing about this place that no one talks about. The barn. I remember my first day on the job. The barn looked ordinary at first, old, creaky, with hay scattered around the floor and the faint smell of animals lingering in the air. But there was something about the atmosphere, a heavy feeling that hung in the air, especially when you went inside at night. The older workers always warned me to avoid the barn after sunset, but they never said why. They'd just exchange nervous glances whenever the topic came up and changed the subject quickly. I thought they were just being superstitious, but I learned differently one fateful evening. It was a cold, misty night, and I had been working late, finishing up some chores. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and I was heading to the barn to lock up the animals for the night. As I approached, I noticed something strange. The barn door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it earlier. Curious, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The silence inside was unsettling. No sounds of the usual barn animals, no rustling of hay, just an eerie stillness. I called out, but no one answered. That's when I saw it. A shadow tall and slender moved across the far wall of the barn. Even though the light was dim and no one else was inside, I froze. The shadow didn't have any distinct features, but it seemed to ripple, like it was shifting in the dim light. It didn't move like a normal shadow either. It seemed to stretch unnaturally, as though it was aware of my presence. I backed out of the barn slowly, heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the barn itself was watching me. I should have left then, but instead, I returned the next night. Something told me that I had to know what was in there. I stepped inside again, and this time, I wasn't alone. The barn was filled with a thick darkness, so dense it felt like I was walking through a heavy fog. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The air was thick with an oppressive energy. Then, I heard a soft, almost inaudible whisper, coming from the far corner of the barn. It wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, like the sound of something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. I forced myself to move toward the sound, even though every part of me screamed to turn and run. As I approached the corner, I saw it again, the shadow, but this time, it wasn't just on the wall. It was standing in the corner, alive, taking shape in the darkness. It was tall, far taller than any person, with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I screamed and stumbled backward, but it was as if time slowed down. The shadow reached out, its fingers cold as ice, brushing against my skin. I could feel its presence inside my mind, like it was trying to consume my very thoughts in a panic. I grabbed the nearest thing, one of the old pitchforks in the corner, and shoved it toward the shadow. It screeched a sound like nails on a chalkboard and retreated into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I ran from the barn, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I couldn't explain what I had just seen, but I knew one thing for sure. That barn was cursed. The next day, I tried to tell the Woodrows what happened, but they wouldn't listen. They just gave me that same worried look and said, "You're not the first to experience it." After that, I never went back into that barn. I moved to a different farm soon after, but I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night, when the air grows cold, and I know that whatever was in that barn is still out there. I'm Ethan Miller, and I've been living and working on the Edgewater farm for as long as I can remember. It's a peaceful place, far from the chaos of the city, where the only sounds are the rustling of the leaves and the occasional moo of a cow. But there's a truth to the farm that no one talks about, something that's been passed down through generations. hidden beneath layers of silence and superstition. Every year, as the harvest season nears, strange things start to happen. I was 15 when I first noticed it. The nights grow colder, and the sky turns an eerie shade of red as the harvest moon rises. That's when it starts. Voices in the wind, whispers on the edge of your hearing, and the feeling that you're not alone. But it's not just the voices. There's something else. The crops grow faster, twisted, and overripe, as if they're being fed by something unnatural. I didn't believe the stories at first. The older farmhands would joke about the harvest of souls, saying the land demanded a sacrifice each year. They'd laugh it off, but their eyes would shift nervously. When the topic came up, I thought it was just an old farm tradition, nothing more than a spooky tale to keep the workers in line. But that all changed one night. It was just after dusk, and I was in the cornfield, doing my usual rounds. The moon was high, casting a sickly glow over the rows of crops. I heard a faint sound, like a child crying, coming from the far side of the field. Curious, I followed the sound, weaving through the thick stalks, my boots crunching in the dry earth. I reached a clearing and stopped, dead in my tracks. There, in the center of the field, stood a figure pale gaunt and dressed in ragged clothes. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow, but then it moved. Slowly, too slowly. The figure turned its head, and I saw its eyes wide, hollow, and empty. A cold shiver ran down my spine as it began to speak. "Help me," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I took a step back, my heart racing, but the figure reached out with long, bony fingers. "It's too late," it hissed. "You can't escape the harvest." Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet trembled. I looked down to see the corn writhing, twisting like snakes, and I felt something cold wrap around my legs. The figure's grip tightened as it pulled me toward the ground. I struggled, but it was no use. The corn was alive, pulling me deeper into the earth, its tendrils wrapping around my body. And then, I saw them faces, dozens of faces, all trapped in the corn, their eyes pleading for help. The figure leaned close, and I could smell something foul like rotten earth and decay. "The land takes its payment every year," it croaked, "and you're the one chosen tonight." With one final, desperate cry, I broke free, stumbling backward out of the field. The figure let out a low, guttural laugh as I ran for my life. I didn't stop until I was back at the farmhouse, gasping for air. The next morning I went back to the field, heart pounding. The corn was still there, but everything seemed normal. There were no signs of the figure, no strange whispers. I thought maybe it had all been a dream, but as I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. There, in the soil where I had been pulled down, was a patch of earth freshly disturbed and a single bloody handprint. I've never gone back to that field, and every year, when the harvest moon rises, I hear the whispers again, and I know it's only a matter of time before the land comes for me. My name is Luke Harris, and I've worked on farms my whole life. There's something about the wide open spaces and the endless rows of crops that feels like freedom. But there's one thing that never made sense to me. The whispering fields. The farm I worked on, Briarwood Acres, was a large property surrounded by miles of wheat fields. It was beautiful, especially at sunset when the golden light bathed the land in a warm glow. But after dark, those fields were something else. They didn't feel peaceful, they felt alive. I first noticed it a few weeks after I started working there. One evening, while I was walking back to the farmhouse, I heard soft voices carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was just the rustling of the wheat, but as I listened more closely, I realized the voices were too distinct. They were whispering words I couldn't understand, like a language I had never heard before. Curious, I decided to walk into the fields the next evening. I had to know what was going on. The wind was calm, and there was no reason for the crops to sway the way they were. But they did. It was as if the plants were alive, shifting and groaning under their own power. I stood in the middle of the field, straining to hear the whispers. They came from every direction, surrounding me like a dense fog. I could feel the cold creeping in, the air growing heavier with each passing second. The voices were getting louder, clearer. And then, I heard something that made my blood run. Cold. A voice, deep and chilling, whispered my name, Luke. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was no one in sight. The field was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Suddenly, the whispers turned into laughter, low, eerie, and mocking. It echoed through the field, reverberating off the crops. And then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. At the far end of the field, in the shadows, a figure stood. A tall, thin silhouette, its shape obscured by the wheat. It was watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was staring right at me. I couldn't look away. The whispers became frantic, almost desperate, and I felt something pushing against me, forcing me to move toward the figure. It was like the field itself was pulling me closer. I broke free from the grip of the field and ran back to the farmhouse as fast as I could. I could hear the whispers following me, getting louder with every step, but when I reached the porch, they stopped. The next day, I went back to the field, hoping it was just a bad dream. But when I stepped into the wheat, I saw something that made me freeze in my tracks. A set of footprints bare, deep impressions in the dirt, leading toward the spot where I had seen the figure. But there was no one there. I haven't been back to the field since, but sometimes, at night, I can still hear the whispers, drifting on the wind, and they still call my name. My name is Sarah Wright, and I've always been drawn to the rural life. There's something about the simplicity of the farm, everything in its place, the fresh air, the quiet mornings that makes it feel like home. But there's one place on the farm that I've always avoided. The old barn at the far end of the property. The barn had been there for as long as anyone could remember. It was worn down, the wooden planks darkened by years of neglect, and the roof was beginning to cave. And I often wondered why no one bothered to fix it, but when I asked my father, he would always give me the same answer. Some places are better left alone, Sarah, he'd say, his voice carrying a strange weight. That barn's seen things. I never thought much of it. After all, my father had his superstitions, just like the others on the farm, but I couldn't ignore the strange feeling I got whenever I walked near the barn. The air around it always felt colder, heavier, as though the building was watching me. One evening, after a long day's work, I decided to confront my fear. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the barn. The sky was darkening, and the wind was picking up, rustling the trees in the distance. As I approached, I could feel the temperature drop, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I pushed open the creaky door, and the sound echoed through the empty space. Inside, the barn was a labyrinth of old crates and rusted farming tools. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I made my way deeper inside. I shone the flashlight around, and that's when I saw it, a dark, shifting shape in the corner. I froze at first. I thought it was a trick of the light, but the shadow didn't move like a shadow should. It was solid, almost like something was standing there, just out of sight. The more I stared, the clearer it became. It was a figure, tall, thin, with a hood that obscured its face. I tried to turn and leave, but my feet wouldn't move. It felt like the very air was holding me in place. The shadow began to glide toward me, its movements unnatural, like it was floating just above the ground. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. As it reached me, it whispered something, words I couldn't understand. Then, its hand, pale and skeletal, reached for me. I finally broke free from whatever force was holding me and bolted for the door. As I ran out, I could hear its footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. The barn door slammed shut on its own as I reached the yard, and when I turned around, the barn was silent. The next day, I went back to the barn to check if it had all been some kind of hallucination. But when I stepped inside, everything was exactly as it had been the night before, except for one thing. There was a new footprint in the dust, a single bare foot. I never went near the barn again, but sometimes on quiet nights, I can hear the faint sound of footsteps coming from inside, and the shadow still lingers. My name is Ethan Cole, and I thought I had seen everything during my time working on farms. I'd handled every type of animal, every kind of crop, and endured my fair share of long, sleepless nights. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened with the haystack at Fox Hill Farm. Fox Hill had been in the family for generations. It was a big property with acres of fields and barns, and a large haystack sat just outside the main farmhouse. The farm had always been well kept, except for that one corner of the field where the haystack stood. For years, it was always a little strange. The hay seemed to never settle, always moving like it was alive. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but even on still days, the hay would shift. It creaked and groaned like something was hidden inside. I'd heard stories from the older worker stories of a curse that had been placed on the land long ago. They all laughed it off as superstition, but I couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that had settled over me whenever I worked near that haystack. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I decided to investigate. I was alone on the farm that night. The air was thick with the scent of fresh grass, and the sky had turned a dusky shade of orange. I approached the haystack, my footsteps crunching against the dry earth. As I got closer, I could see the hay moving again, but this time, it wasn't just the wind. Something was stirring within. I heard a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl. It was coming from the heart of the haystack. A feeling of dread settled over me, and I almost turned to leave, but something made me stay. I reached out and grabbed a handful of hay, pulling it aside. As I did, the growl grew louder. I pulled more and more, until I uncovered what was hiding underneath, a skeleton. But not just any skeleton. This one was different. The bones were charred, burned, as if they had been set on fire, and then left to rot. And the worst part, there were markings on the bones, strange symbols that seemed to move as I looked at them. I stumbled back, heart racing, but then the ground beneath me began to shake. The haystack trembled violently, as if it were alive. I watched in horror, as the skeleton's hand twitched, then slowly reached out, as if trying to grab me. I turned and ran as I sprinted back to the farmhouse. I could hear a voice, soft and hoarse, whispering through the night, get out, before it wakes." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went to the haystack again, but it was gone. The ground was completely still, the hay neatly stacked, just like it had always been. But I knew what I had seen. There was something buried beneath that haystack, a curse that had been waiting for someone to uncover it. And now, I knew better than to ever approach that spot again. But sometimes, when I pass by the field at night, I hear the growling again, and the whispers. My name is Andrew Pierce, and I've spent my whole life working the land. I thought I knew every inch of the farm I grew up on, till I found the well. It was hidden behind the barn, overgrown with vines, and almost completely covered by dirt and debris. I had no idea it was there, not until that day when I was clearing out some old junk. I was tired, filthy from hours of work, when I noticed a dark hole in the ground. At first, I thought it was just a hole dug by some animal, but something about it felt wrong. The air around it was heavier, colder. I knelt down to get a better look, and that's when I saw the faint outline of stones buried beneath the soil. I dug it out, slowly, carefully. The well wasn't deep, about 6 feet down, but it looked ancient. Its stone walls were worn and cracked, and the water at the bottom was dark, like ink. That's when I heard it, a whisper, low, soft, but unmistakable. It came from deep within the well. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew someone was speaking to me. I leaned closer, straining to hear. The whisper became clearer. Help, ... help me. I recoiled, heart pounding in my chest. I stood up and took a step back, shaking my head. There was no way. It was just the wind, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something in that well. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I had to go back. I don't know why, but I couldn't leave it alone. I returned after dark, when the farm was silent. The well was waiting, as if it had been calling to me. This time, the whispers were louder, more urgent. ... please. ... pull me out. I grabbed a nearby rope and tied it to a wooden post, dropping the other end into the well. My heart raced as I tied a hook to the end, hoping I could pull something out, anything. But when the hook hit the water, there was a sudden pull from below, as though someone was grabbing it from the other side. I fought with all my strength, but the pull was relentless. It was as though whatever was down there was trying to drag me in. I dropped the rope, but it didn't stop. The whispers became frantic now, echoing round the well. You'll regret it. You'll regret it. I ran back to the house, but that night I could hear it faint, almost drowned out by the wind, but unmistakable. Help me. ... help me, before it's too late. The well remains there to this day, a black pit in the ground. I haven't gone near it since that night. I've heard the whispers again, but now I know better. There's something down there, voice trapped, begging for release. But I don't think it's asking for help anymore. It's warning me. My name is Simon Reynolds. I've worked on farms for years, but nothing could prepare me for what I experienced at Greendale Farm. It was a place that had a reputation for growing the best crops, year after year. But there was a reason for that one I didn't learn until it was too late. It started when I noticed the crops in the farthest field. They were rotting. At first, I thought it was just a bad batch. The rest of the fields were fine, so I didn't think much of it. But over the next few days, the rot spread. The corn began to wilt, turning black at the edges. It was like the decay was moving from plant to plant, infecting everything it touched. One evening, I went out to investigate. The sun was setting, and the field was bathed in an eerie golden light. As I walked between the rows of crops, I noticed something strange, a shadow moving among the dying plants. It was tall, but too thin, stretching unnaturally across the field. I called out, but there was no response. The shadow didn't move like a person. It seemed to sway, as if it was being blown by an invisible wind, but there was no breeze. I kept walking, drawn to it, despite the growing sense of dread in my chest. As I got closer, I could see it more clearly. The shadow wasn't a person at all, it was a figure made of the decay itself. Its body was composed of rotting plants, twisted and contorted into a form that was both human and something else entirely. Its face was an empty, hollowed-out mask of moldy wood and writhing roots. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It didn't seem to notice me, or maybe it just didn't care. Slowly, it reached out, touching the nearest stalk of corn, and I watched in horror as the plant wilted instantly, the leaves turning to black mush. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was back at the farmhouse. I tried to tell the others, but they just laughed it off. It's just nature, they said. The weather's been harsh. It'll pass. But the rot didn't pass. It spread faster, until the entire farm was infected. The air grew thick with the stench of decay. People started to leave. Those who stayed grew pale and weak. It was as though the farm itself was dying, and it was pulling everything with it. That night, I went back to the field. I couldn't stay away. I had to know what was happening. I saw it again, the figure made of rot. standing at the center of the field. This time, it turned toward me. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something cold and unnatural crawling inside me. "You can't stop it," it whispered in a voice that sounded like the wind through dead leaves. I ran, but this time, I didn't look back. Greendale Farm was never the same again. I don't know what happened to the others, but I've never been able to forget the figure in the field, the one made of rot and decay. My name is Clara Hines. I didn't believe in ghosts. Not until I spent a summer working on a farm outside of town. It was meant to be a simple escape from the city, a way to clear my head. Little did I know, the farm I chose had secrets that would never let me go. It all started with the barn. There was something off about it. It was an old wooden structure, falling apart in some places, but still standing tall. Every time I passed by it, I felt like something was watching me. The air around it was always colder, and there was a strange stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. One night, I decided to investigate. I was alone on the farm. Everyone else had gone into town for supplies, and I figured it would be the perfect time to explore. As I approached the barn, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. I hesitated for a moment, but pushed the door open. The inside was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The smell of hay and old wood filled the air. But then, I saw it. A figure standing at the far corner of the barn. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But as I stepped closer, the figure came into sharper focus. It was a woman, pale, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with long tangled hair that fell over her face. She was staring at me, her eyes hidden in the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding. "Who are you?" I whispered, though I knew she wouldn't answer. She didn't move. But then, I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible. "Help me." I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. But the woman didn't follow. She remained rooted in place, her head tilting slightly, as if she was waiting for something. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The temperature dropped suddenly, the air thick with an unnatural chill. The woman's voice echoed again, louder this time. "Help me, ... before it's too late." I was terrified. I ran to the door, throwing myself against it with all my strength. It flew open, and I stumbled outside, gasping for breath. The barn door slammed shut again behind me, and the whispering ceased. The next day, I told the farmer about what happened. He just stared at me like I was crazy. "That barn's been abandoned for years," he said. "Nothing lives there anymore." But when I went to the barn later that day, I could have sworn I saw her again standing in the corner, her eyes hollow and searching. I left the farm that night, but I could never forget the ghost in the barn. The whispers still haunt my dreams. My name is Finn Carter. I grew up on the miller's farm, a quiet place surrounded by endless fields of corn. It was a peaceful life. That was before the harvest began to change. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual earthy scent of ripening crops. It was something heavier. A mix of decay, rot, and something darker. I thought it was just the dead plants I'd been plucking, but the smell followed me, day and night. Then the whispers began, soft, barely audible at first, but by dusk, they were impossible to ignore. I'd hear them coming from the fields, low, hushed voices that spoke in a language I didn't understand. One evening, I decided to find the source. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the corn, determined to get to the bottom of it. As I walked, the whispers grew louder, then the rustling. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the corn wasn't moving like it should. It wasn't. The wind. The stalks were parting, slowly, as if something was making its way through them. I followed the path, and then I saw it. A figure. A tall, dark shape standing still in the middle of the field. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It turned toward me, Its face wasn't human. No eyes. Just dark holes where they should have been, and a smile too wide, too unsettling. It spoke in the same language I'd heard before, but this time, I understood. It said, "The harvest is yours now." I ran. The whispers chased me all the way home. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, but the sound of the rustling corn was still there. I couldn't escape it. The next day, I went out to the field again. The corn had grown, but not in the way it should have. It was twisted, distorted, and there, in the center, was the figure again, standing like it had never moved. I had no choice but to leave. The farm wasn't mine anymore. The harvest had claimed its hand. It was coming for me next. My name is Elias Walker. I was hired to work at the Everfield farm last summer. It was supposed to be a temporary job, just some odd labor to help pay the bills. What I didn't know was that Everfield wasn't just any farm. The first warning sign came when I saw the old plow in the back shed. It was a relic rusty worn, and far too ancient to be of much use. The owner, Mr. Everfield, saw me eyeing it one day and chuckled. "That plow's been in the family for generations. It never fails." I should have asked more questions. The first week on the farm was quiet, but there was something about the land that felt off. The soil was unnaturally dark, almost black in places, and the crops grew at an alarming rate, faster than they should. But it was the plow that caught my attention next. Mr. Everfield insisted that I use it to break some fresh ground at the far end of the field. I didn't argue. What else was I supposed to do? But the moment the plow touched the earth, something changed. A cold wind swept across the field. The ground trembled beneath me. Then I heard it low, faint, like a whispering voice carried on the wind. I stopped, looking around, but saw nothing. Then the plow stuck. I tried to lift it, but it wouldn't budge. As I knelt down to investigate, I felt a chill crawling up my spine. The ground beneath the plow was soft, too soft, and there, in the mud, were handprints. Small, skeletal hands, etched into the earth as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I stepped back. Something was wrong. The wind picked up, and the whispers became clearer. I could hear words now, though they sounded distorted, like someone speaking underwater. "Help, us, break the curse." Panicked, I yanked the plow free and ran back to the barn. Mr. Everfield was standing there, watching me with a knowing look. "You've seen it now, haven't you?" he asked, his voice cold as ice. "What's wrong with that plow?" I demanded. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "That plow, it's not for tilling soil. It's for breaking the ground open. It's for digging up the past." I didn't stay after that day. I packed up and left without looking back. But as I drove away, I saw it in the rearview mirror, the plow standing on its own in the field, the wind blowing around it in an eerie circle, and I heard the whispers again.